The special meeting, Council Committee of the Whole for budget discussions to order at 10 a.m. for October 15th. Jody?
Good morning. Please note, council meetings are streamed live and recorded on YouTube. Attendees acknowledge that in accordance with Section 17(2)(g) of the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, names, addresses, and other details provided when speaking at a council meeting will be publicly shared. Should you have any questions related to the collection or disclosure of personal information, please contact the Legislative and Advisory Services Division for the Town of High River by sending an email to foip@highriver.ca. That's FOIP@highriver.ca.
Thanks, Jody. Ask for a motion from Councillor Kinghorn that the Committee of the Whole adopt the agenda for the Special Committee of the Whole Budget Discussions meeting October 15th as presented.
Thank you, Mayor Snodgrass. You have my motion.
Thank you. All in favor? Carried. Capital projects overview. Chris, David, Michelle?
Good morning, Mayor and Council. Thank you for your time this morning. This meeting is meeting 2 of 3 in our budget conversations with the intent to bring final budget approval back to Council on November the 12th. The agenda for today is very focused. Just hold on. Yeah. Thank you. The agenda today is very focused, very specific. We'll take a few minutes, just review some of the key concepts that we introduced in our last meeting, October 7th, where we detailed some of our key budget assumptions. After that, we'll move directly into capital and special projects. This is intended to be a final discussion and decisions around capital and special projects. We did introduce the draft capital list last week, and we're hoping for go, no go decisions today on that list. And then the final item today will be to list out next steps at future meetings, that sort of thing. So in terms of budget assumptions and highlights, again, as introduced last week, consistent with the detailed budget model that we distributed and the summary, we prepared the draft budget with the following assumptions. Number one, it was prepared on a revenue neutral basis, so just new assessments of approximately $200,000. So historically, new assessments we've priced at around 110. For this budget, 2025, we've increased that given the growth of the town by an additional 90,000. So new assessments, 200,000. The budget continues to see the implementation of the previously approved compensation framework to maintain competitiveness and attract top talent. And we've again detailed that within the models that we provided last week, but the overall cost is about $1.2 million. FTE largely consistent with last year's budget at 155. Cost reductions, we reinvested to offset the aquatics labor change. That was valued at about $340,000. And with the budget that we provided to you, we were looking at a 0% property tax revenue increase, so no tax increase within the budget model itself. We will come back next week, look at various assumptions or scenarios for Council to consider should we wish to increase tax revenues. Any increases will be linked to new projects, programs, or increased level of service or reserves. And again, consistent with previous practice, we're looking at about transferring $2.7 million to reserves. That is a combination of water, sewer, and solid waste to continue to strengthen our reserve positions. Community group funding, again, we've priced in the budget at about $900,000, and these are all supported by fee-for-service agreements. Other revenue increases, we increased by about 3.62% over previous budget to recognize various changes to the bylaw rate schedules And we'll be coming back to council at the November 24th meeting to look at those rate schedules in detail to seek your approval at that time. Just a reminder, 1% increase in net tax revenue is about $156,000, and 1% increase in tax revenue equates to about 1.4% increase in mill rates, as previously discussed. And at this time, the average residential assessment value, again, has gone up about 7%. So on average, $31,000 to $476,000 from $445,000 over the previous year. So as introduced last week, we do have a balanced budget. We have provided you with a balanced budget. And again, the objective here is to get to a budget net surplus before adjustments of about $3.65 million. At that level, we're able to pay off our long-term debt. It's about $960,000. And then again, we make a provision for transfer to reserves to continue to keep them at a healthy position. And that drives our balanced budget per the Municipal Government Act. So how did we get to the $3.65 million? From a revenue position, you can see the $200,000, the new construction that we've added, compared to $110,000 from previous year. New taxation last year, about $350,000. That was about a 2.2% revenue increase. We have budgeted a 0% increase in tax or new taxation. And then, of course, our existing taxpayers, $15,442, to give us $15,642 in terms of net municipal taxes. Other revenues, as I mentioned, increased by 3.62% over previous year. And that is on the basis of increases to some of our fee schedules that we'll come back to council with, to give us total revenues of about $33,820, or 2.53% increase over previous year. And then from a revenue or an expense perspective, of course, salaries, wages, and benefits being the largest of our expenses. What we presented here is a continuity look. So we started with previous years, $16,250, and then we added incrementals, including out-of-scope average merit increase 2%, so that equates to $87,000. New aquatic staffing model, you can see that at $342,000, and we were able to fund that through reduction in other expenses, as previously noted. And we've got some other increases, benefit increases, step increases, and then cost of living. And then there's always programming changes that we are making. So total salary, wages, and benefits, $17,456. And then other expenses, a tremendous amount of cost control and cost constraint. And where it made sense, cost reinvestment. So we reduced other expenses by about 3.21% over previous budget, so $12,714. Total expenses, $30,170. Compared to revenues, $33,820, and the residual gets us to the balanced perspective of $36,500 in order to pay our debt and in order to continue to support our reserve positions. Any questions?
Thanks, David. Councillor Kinghorn.
Thank you, Mayor Snodgrass. I'm looking for clarification on two items. Reserves. Is there a breakdown on those where we're going to put those lumps of money, and is it restricted?
Yes, they are restricted. They go into existing restricted pools.
Which pools?
Wastewater treatments, water treatments. I can come back to council with a confirmed list. But
thank you. I'd appreciate that. The second one, I want to be more clear again for the public and council on the wages. Again, when I read this, it looks like a 7.42% increase. My understanding is that is not an increase to individuals, that is an increase in cost of labor in general.
And that is correct.
Thank you.
No other questions? Continue on, David.
Okay, thank you. I'll hand it over to Chris for the capital and projects discussion.
Thanks, David. Good morning, everyone. Today, we're just going to run through the capital list with a little bit more detail and outline the status of those projects. There are 5 carry forwards that we'll cover off first. David, I'll have to ask you to move the slides for me. I don't have access for that. So carried over into 2025 is our wastewater treatment plant. We are right now working with the county on a regional feasibility analysis to see if that can function as a regional wastewater treatment plant and fulfill their needs as well. That study is nearing completion. We're about 90% complete, and we should be seeing the results of that coming in by the end of this year. We currently have a grant in place from the province for about $11 million, I believe it is, to complete the project. The current estimates are around the $29 million range for that project in total cost. And that's why we're seeking that partnership with the county. Town Farm Outdoor Rink construction process will be completed. It is a design build project to replace that outdoor rink with an all-season rink and sport court. Right now, we had budgeted $600,000 from the Saffron Properties Fund. That included the design process. There will be a request for increase. We're just finalizing the final scope of that, but the design build approach with Brysand looks at it to be about $736,000. Because we did not get any bids for our pathway replacement program for the next series of projects, they're carry forward. This is coming from what's termed the former gas tax funding or the community building fund. The project scope this year was to take a look at repairs and enhancements along 12th Avenue. We had lots of root intrusions, lots of the pathway is starting to fail, and replacing that with asphalt. Next slide, please. We also had identified a missing link on 9th Street as part of this project. This is also funded from the former gas tax funding. This was delayed as well and carried over because we had no bidders for that project. Rio Vista Disc Golf Course, we're in the final approval stages with the province. We hope to finally have access across the canal. Once we have that, then we'll be able to proceed with our partners on building several disc golf courses within the former Rio Vista properties. And then, of course, the BSRC renovations, aquatics expansions, that's going to be a carry-forward project that's funded from grants and capital reserves. Next slide, please. New projects that we have on the list. And we're going to go through these one by one and welcome questions and feedback on each one of them, whether it stays on the list or whether it goes. This is kind of a quick priority setting capital project list from that perspective. 112th Street East upgrade. This is that gravel stretch on the northeast quadrant of the community where we're currently doing the ASP for those residents out there. It's got 3 options. One to partially oil and or to zip and grade, zip, gravel, and oil, or to core out the entire road and return it to a full gravel standard at $1.25 million. We do believe that is STIP grant eligible because it is deemed a regional transportation corridor. We do think that we could be successful in that grant funding, but we have to see if it makes the list, whether we submit it for this year or not. 12th Avenue paving from the east end at the edge of the overpass to approximately the RCMP intersection at $1.17 million. We're seeing that road deteriorate and seeing some pothole patching and extensive repairs taking place, but to repair that to that section for 4 lanes. That could also be STIP grant eligible. We're still exploring that option. 64th Street paving northwest. This is a gravel standard road up by Bigfoot Storage. It's been a point of conversation for the last 4 or 5 years about its condition. This is returning it to a permanent paved dust-free surface with ditches on both sides, at 1.95 million, funded from capital reserve. Next slide, please. As we're starting to see our pavers starting to settle and some fail, we started the downtown paver stone rehabilitation project this year at $100,000 operational cost. We're seeing how far that goes. Work is currently underway. That's why you see the number blank right now. We think that number will come down, but we don't know what that will be depending on how far $100,000 takes us. This is a multi-year project, but it should be something that we inject automatically into the operational budget at a certain sum so that we continue the maintenance of those stones and we make sure that no trip hazards exist. First Street to 7th Avenue sidewalk widening downtown. So this is a downtown project. Estimates from the design project cost come in about $320,000, and this would be from the gas tax funding. Next slide, please. BGC new sidewalk. We put this project on hold right now because we're determining the viability of that building through an assessment and trying to do a mold remediation. We'll come back with a price on that once we understand if that building's savable or not. Curling Club Lounge washroom. This is kind of renovating it and upgrading it with some consideration of stall sizes and painting and kind of renewing it, about $60,000, but that's within the maintenance budget. BGC elevator repair. The reason why we found the mold was we decided to improve accessibility in there and to try and reinstitute the elevator that existed that was shut down back in the early 2000s. But we put that project on hold for the time being while we determine whether or not the building's viable or not. Building roof maintenance, just still waiting on quotes on this, but it's an annual maintenance program to make sure our roofs don't leak. This will be put into our operating budget form. Next slide, please. Museum painting. Again, renewing one of our facilities, painting the exterior of the museum. Waiting on quotes still for that project, and that will come out of the operating budget. Culture Center repurposing, we're still working on that project. The accessibility has been a struggle from that perspective. The existing wheelchair, or the disability ramp is not necessarily to code, and looking at alternatives and how to enhance the accessibility to that building to make it more functional. In addition, after almost 2 years within that building, FCSS has noticed that they are requested that they like a little bit more privacy so they can deal with clients in a different way and to reduce noise. So a divider wall of about $20,000 in that building. And that would come out of previous carry forward funding from previous taxation. Next slide, please. Roof exhaust fan. We're still waiting on the charter on this one. It's been shortlisted, but we're not sure what the price will be on this one. We're actually not sure if it's necessary either, so we're diving into that one a little bit deeper. Air handler for the small arena and curling rink. It identified that air handler. Chiller. So it's the chiller. Sorry, not the air handler, the chiller. So yeah. So this is the chiller. So replacing the chiller for the small rink and the curling rink at $175,000 coming from capital reserve. Fire sprinkler assessments. All our fire sprinkler systems within our buildings need to have a detailed assessment. We've requested a charter that's still outstanding, and we're waiting for the final quotes to come in. Library outdoor improvement project. This is taking a look at the lighting, some of the stormwater issues, as well as the ice buildup on the sidewalks in the wintertime. We're in the design process right now of that and the concept development. So we don't have a price for that project quite yet if we want to proceed in 2025. Next slide. Water and sewer master plan. As we prepare for redeveloping our offsite levies and looking down to the future, we are 8 years into our current water and sewer master planning process. They need to be updated so we understand how we're going to manage growth, what our asset renewal aspects is going to be, and this is going to be funded from utility reserve, 50-50 from water and sewer. Sidewalk condition assessment, we're still waiting proposals for this assessment. They have not come in. and to highlight the hazards from that. It's not to highlight the hazards, but to highlight the condition of our sidewalks throughout the community and whether we're making significant investments in making that happen. Some mapping upgrades, LiDAR updates, so that we can have current information that's geo-referenced, $30,000. Engineering and planning electronic plan review table. This would be 2 pieces of equipment. One, a larger scale planning table that engineering could use and look at large scale plans digitally, because we are moving towards fully electronic plans. And then a smaller scale one for planning upstairs so that they can have the same access. Next slide, please. That's a repeat. And then the final piece is a new hot seat for the fleet. So this is a hot water system that we use to unplug storm systems, help with frozen water lines if we have that opportunity, and also using it around our public workshop on a regular basis, $20,000 for that project. So that's, last couple. Median at the Fountain Tire berm naturalization. So this is that berm that's behind, separating the residential from the commercial industrial, that lines 12th from 5th to about, I can't remember the street, but that berm behind the Fountain Tire area. Right now, how it's sloped is it creates a stormwater issue that impacts the buildings that back along there. So this would be a construction project. The design's completed. Construction project about $1.165 million. And then Crescent Avenue. So neighborhood up in the southeast. Older aging water and sanitary sewer lines, 1962. We've seen an increased number of breaks along there. So completing the design for the sewer and water replacement at about $65,000 funded from utility reserve. Next slide. Next. Is there another slide, David?
That is the next slide.
Oh, that's the next slide. Oh, sorry. Headset hearing protection for engine 41. The existing protection was purchased 13 years ago. It's starting to fail, so $11,000 from capital reserve. And then our breathing air compressor was purchased in 2008. Right now they need a 2x4 to hold it closed so that it can fill their SCBA tanks. It's a $60,000 cost, but there's also a potential purchaser that is maybe interested in our old tank as well from that perspective. So, interpretive educational sign replacement. This is on a case-by-case basis. We have several of the interpretive signs that are showing some cracking due to solar impacts, just weathering, and so we're going to be targeting the worst sign and kind of going from there. It's likely around $1,500 to $2,000 per sign, but it'll be something that we'll be adding to our operating budget. George Lane Park, South Washroom, design exercise to turn that into an all-season washroom facility so that it can be used in the wintertime. As we see some of our park spaces see increased winter activity, there has been a request for additional functionality for washroom facilities. And so that would be a design exercise from that perspective. And then just the conversation about year-round washrooms facilities and extending washroom facilities out from our core Spark spaces along our pathway systems. We do get lots of feedback about the lack of washroom facilities along our pathway system, and looking at ways to enhance those facilities. Emerson Lake landscape design, $30,000 to kind of move it into a more sustainable, naturalized park space. Wallaceville pathway realignment. As you've noticed over the last several years, the freeze-thaw cycle creates a flooding hazard along there. We also have had some complaints about the proximity to the road and the speeds of individuals driving along the road and unsafeness that they feel and the perception. So this would look at realignment and trying to get some separation along that pathway to improve both stormwater as well as the feeling of safety. Software replacement and recreation. Staff have come back forward to the fact that they don't like the existing software system, Activant for booking system, our booking system, that it doesn't provide the functionality that a modern recreation department actually should have, creates multiple steps, doesn't integrate well with our future ERP, and so they're looking at or requesting $125,000 coming from operating reserve for that replacement. So that's the list. And welcome comments if we want to go back to the start and start going through it from a yes/no perspective that continues on to the next phase, because council still has opportunities to cut things from a capital perspective right up until budget adoption. We don't necessarily, this is not necessarily the final list, but this gets us more focused from that perspective. It is one of our lighter years, considering that we are wrapping up renewal. So it's kind of nice to take a little bit of a breath and do a little bit more planning from that perspective from our viewpoint. So.
Thanks, Chris. We'll get into the questions, but I think big one to focus on today for council would be these road projects and how you want to move forward, but we'll get into that after questions. But Councillor Kinghorn.
Thank you, Mayor Snodgrass. My, not necessarily a question, but a comment around the Fountain Tire berm naturalization. When you read the document here, it seems to say design. It doesn't talk about the actual project being completed. Can we make sure that line item is changed to reflect that and that it's not just the design work?
Yes, the design has been completed, so we're into the process that it's ready to go out for tender.
But when you read the line here.
Yeah, we'll make that correction.
Thank you.
Councillor Nychuk.
Thanks, Mayor Snodgrass. I got an initial question before details on all the capital projects. But are we going to you, Mr. Mayor, are we just going to go from the top of the list and go through and down instead of maybe perhaps us firing questions and bouncing all over the place? Okay, then my first question, other than details into each of those projects, is staff capacity. I mentioned this before, but I think that's my first and biggest burning question is, do we have capacity to do all these projects? Because if we're going to talk about doing them and saying yes or no to any of them, the capacity piece first resonates with me. And I guess that would be this list in front of us. Do we have 100% capacity to complete these projects for 2025? And if not, then why do we have such a comprehensive list? Thanks.
Yeah, and to answer that second part of that question, a comprehensive list, I think, a lot of some of these lists have come from previous identified council meetings that we've identified and put on the list. It doesn't necessarily match up with our human capacity. So we've made them aware so that we're always closing that loop from a council perspective and making sure that, council is cognitively aware of what that we're closing that loop. When we talk about human capacity, certainly our engineering department, with all the development that's taking place, does farm out quite a bit of the design work. So that helps to an extent. But we also have a major capital project underway with the aquatics as well that's taking quite a bit of time and should be. So when you take a look at, say, for the road projects, for example, probably one is probably the capacity that we have the capability of doing within that road project aspect of things. The other ones, when you take a look at the other list, it's other departments. From a painting of the museum is an operational department aspect of things. So you're probably taking a look at one project in roads, one project maybe in storm, and then a series of, handful of design projects of 4 or 5 design projects that they can undertake. So I hope that answers that question, Councillor Nychuk.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And it wasn't to throw it at you and say, hey, like, you got this big list that you gave us that you want to do. I understand that council brings things forward, but I would hope that you and your team feel comfortable enough to tell council the things on the list are slightly unreasonable. We have more than we can handle as a working group. So some of that feedback is good too. We can give you a list of a bazillion things to do, but there's only so much that's achievable in a calendar year with the resources we have. So thanks, Chris.
And certainly for all of council, we do know that there's some projects on here that have been brought up in the past, but certainly aren't a priority of council at this point in time, because they've in the previous meeting they've made that clear. So we know that there's going to be some that probably get crossed off the list. There's also ones that we can easily defer from that perspective too, considering how much time and money has been invested in BSRC over the last several years too, from the roof system to other components that are being worked on over the last two, the large slab, the small slab, and the curling rink from that perspective. So that's kind of what we're looking at. And we want to go through that as a group with council and have honest conversations about each individual project.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. One question that I wanted to, just as we're framing this conversation around the water and sewer master plan, given the exploration with Nanton, will they feature in that piece of it? Is there, what do you anticipate achieving through the master plan process?
So Director McCarricker could probably speak to that better than I could.
Thank you. So the sewer and water master plan typically looks at our current infrastructure sizing. We run it to make sure, we run a model to make sure that we're meeting demands when it comes to fire flow or connection points like Nanton or the county, and make sure we're planning for the future. So identifying the required projects, which then feeds into the offsite levy program as well as our capital list. And planning those out to make sure we're doing the right projects at the right time, and we're meeting the needs of the community.
Thank you. My other question was, I just wanted clarification. So the engineering table, that was a duplicate on page 17 going into 18?
Yes.
They're showing two.
Yeah, it's just one project that includes two pieces of equipment.
Fair. Okay, thank you.
So yeah, every year we kind of go through, I'm making my list based on what we've got here. We kind of go through council and do an in and out exercise as to what council wishes to take on for the next year. But this list is, that's big, but not unachievable. But I think today's discussion, I would like council to discuss these roads, because they are the big ones. These are the roads that we have acquired through annexation, that were built by Foothills County. They are gravel-topped, gravel and oil roads that take maintenance to keep graded. Everybody knows about the one in the northwest and the one in the northeast. The 12th Avenue paving, I'll just touch on that as to how this even got onto the list. This was a request to me from one of the residents that brought it up because they were upset about something else we were doing and didn't think we should be doing that. It was to do with the Pride crosswalk times. I didn't think anybody should be doing that until we fixed 12th Avenue paving. And I said, well, okay, and if you drive it, I get it. Like, there's lots of potholes and everything, but I want to be clear. There's one. That's how it ended up on here, was just one. So it's not a real high priority for myself, but it is absolutely something that needs to stay on the list, as it is one of the main avenues into High River. And it is starting, potholes and everything else that we get every year. It does need to be redone. But the 1.17 million quote, Chris, is that for a full mill down and rebuild, or is that just pavement on top of what's existing?
It's a combination of both. It's not necessarily a full road rebuild. There's going to be some sections that will be milled down that are a little bit softer than others. But the majority of it, I would say 65% is going to be simply an asphalt overlay with some ditch work and some shoulder work along the sides that encourages positive stormwater drainage.
Okay. And that's 1.17 million. It's crazy how expensive this stuff is, but only from the overpass to the RCMP intersection. Not very long, but it is a four-lane road with big intersection in there. So 112th Street and 64th Street, those are talked about every year. I think we need to continue that as to what we want to do about them, and if anything this year. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm curious with 112th Street, as we're going through the process for the ASP for the area, is it one of those things that we need to address prior to having an ASP completed or after? Or during, I guess?
I guess it depends on the option that council chooses. If it's simply to kind of maintain the existing surface and keep it less maintenance intensive, probably partially oiling it and zippering it is probably the best method. If it's the total rebuild is going down and digging out all the organics and rebuilding the whole road structure to a gravel standard only, no asphalt, no stormwater drainage, no water or sewer lines underneath there. And so, at this juncture, it may be premature to do that full kind of construction aspect of things until the ASP is actually completed. We understand whether or not development out in that corridor is going to be able to fund infrastructure improvements in the future.
Councillor Kinghorn.
Thank you, Mayor Snodgrass. Yeah, I would concur with the previous comments about that 112th. If we could just maintain the thing, I've driven it a number of times, and that road is brutal. It is really bad, but if we could just maintain it until we know what we're doing out there with that area, and I suspect a lot of the damage is a result of the heavy truck traffic that was using that, and now we've got the one business there still, I don't know, they run buses and stuff on it, but it doesn't seem to be as heavy as it was at one time. So if we could just maintain it and make it drivable, it doesn't need to be, like one of our fresh paved roads, but that's what I would prefer. Thank you.
And for council's information, it's certainly a challenging road because what we acquired from the county was the first approximately 40 meters of a gravel standard that's oiled. Then in the middle, there's a little bit of asphalt that we found. And then it goes to gravel with the last 40 or 60 meters. So it is certainly a challenge to maintain, and because it's the two end pieces that get punched out after every rainfall. And so we're there on a weekly basis, correct? So we're there on a weekly basis doing grading to keep those two gravel stretches not so potholy.
Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Mayor Snodgrass. Do we have any idea of how many people drive 112th or 64th Street during a day, a week, however long period of time?
I'd have to get back to you. I think we have some older numbers, a couple years old for 112th. I don't think we have any for the other one, though.
Okay. On here, on 64th Street, which is sort of a street that I like and have continued to sort of advocate for, paving it at $2 million, I do understand is a huge number and probably not something that's going to happen this year. I'm glad to see at least it's on the list. Is there anything that can be done to increase its usability rather than just, I don't know, going over it a few times a year. It gets a lot of potholes. The rain is really hard on it, but it is used a lot, and it would be interesting to see how many people actually do use that road. And if there's some way of maintaining it a little bit better to make it a little more user-friendly, I would like to see that instead of just the paving cost there.
We can certainly take a look at options for 64th, and we can certainly do some traffic counting numbers out there as well to see what the traffic numbers actually look like. Correct me if I'm wrong, Director McCarthy, we did some traffic analysis when we did the Hampton bypass. Are those numbers a little bit old now?
We would still have them. We can dig them up. I would hope they're still relevant. Of note on 64th is the same issue as 112th. We're struggling with an organic substance underneath the road. And so it's always going to have issues until we core it out.
So, out of the list of roads projects, taking the downtown pavers off the list, because that's something that we're working into operations from that perspective.
Should be standard, yeah.
Yeah. Out of the ones that you see,
Hang on, I got a couple more.
okay.
I've got back to Kelly. I think this is getting bounced around a bit. Sorry, you guys, but go ahead, Kelly. Then
Okay.
to Brenda and Michael.
Thank you, Mayor. I just was curious, when we mentioned that if 112th is receiving weekly attention for grading, what that cost amounts to for us by way of, as a comparable to the options ahead of us here. What are we spending weekly to keep that road drivable? Do we know?
We are incurring some costs with a contractor. So for example, we just had it zippered a week or two ago. But other than that, it is internal. Now we can pull the hours and get an approximate number for you, but that will be later in the week.
But I think if you want to know scope, it's probably likely not more than a day or less out in that area that's being graded. So that's on a weekly basis. Yeah,
So we're spending a day a week out there?
that's approximately, yeah.
And how long does it take to do that stretch?
To pull the gravels back and forth, it's probably, a good 3/4 of a day, not including travel time to the site and back.
On an 8-hour average workday?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. About the three different road projects we're discussing right now, the 112th Street project, this is a continually used road. It's a reasonable access off of Highway 2 into our light industrial area. By maintaining or upgrading that, we would potentially reduce the traffic coming in onto 12th Avenue, damaging the road continually with all the truck traffic coming in. It makes most sense, in my opinion, to focus on the 112th Street to support the condition of the other roads. Coming in, whether they come in 498, they'll come in on the 112th or further down into the other entrances, but that seems to me the least likely to change. And being in the area service plan process, we can work with that. As we're developing out that area, no?
Certainly we can work with it. I think, part of the ASP process is that functional engineering aspect of things that works on what is that road going to look like in the future, as well as in combination what it will look like with the prospective land uses that we expect to see out there. Knowing full well that on both sides of the road, it will be developed. One's going to be residential, one may be commercial, mixed use, kind of industrial kind of uses. So, you know, if there is a road that we get a lot of complaints about, that's one of them. And certainly increasing its durability would, in some form, in one of those options, either to zipper it and oil it and compact it as a county standard, would reduce maintenance on it, and would leave options available for what the future alignment and future status of that road actually looks like.
Okay, so improving the maintenance on this road, looking into further development of it, that's where you're going with that?
Yeah, I think, you know, if there was the road that would stick out, this would be the one road project that would be, something has to be done on it.
Yes.
I wouldn't necessarily say to core it out at this point in time without understanding the full engineering scope of what the ASP is going to have out there, and exactly what the alignment for the sewer and water is going to look like. Because there's nothing worse than spending bad money after bad money, so to speak, if that makes sense, right? So we want to make sure that we're doing it effectively, but certainly, you know, certainly doing a mid-range option of zippering and oiling it, and seeing how long that will last might be a cost-effective approach.
Yes, and further to Councillor Smith's comments, the cost effectiveness of this continual maintenance versus a higher level upgrade, which we could be changed after or adapted to the new area service plan. That's my point, is that this does speak the loudest, and to me deserves the most attention.
And I know that it could be a STIP eligible program. We could certainly apply for a STIP grant and see what that came back with. But at the same time, it'd be horrible. I hate to say use the word waste, but waste that STIP grant going to a gravel standard when we could use it in the future to make it the regional corridor. And so we need to be cognizant of that, because we're so close to understand what the future use is going to be out there and what that future alignment is going to look like, that to waste the STIP grant just to get into gravel standard might not be the best grant application we can make.
I see. Thank you.
Councillor Nychuk.
Thanks, Mayor Snodgrass. I'm a little bit frustrated. Do we have any idea what it costs to maintain that road? Like we got to have, we're sitting here making a decision on whether we want to do something with this roadway or not. And we got to wait days to get an approximation of a number of what it costs us to maintain that road on a weekly, monthly, annual basis. Like, I'm not going to hold you to it, but can you give me some kind of idea? Because then I can rationalize that to the expense of the options we have in front of us and how all that plays out. You know, to say we spend a day there and we send a grader and staff and travel and these things that you mentioned, that's okay, that gives me a timeline. But there's got to be some kind of a dollar amount that goes with putting a grader out there, putting a truck with more gravel or whatever those things are, just so, at least for me, I don't know about the rest of the council, but it gives me an idea of where this weighs financially against what the costs are on restructuring the road to the levels that we're talking about here.
Don't hold me to it. So if we're spending, just a guess, 50 to 70,000 externally with gravel and contractors, if we're out there for half a day every week, so say 4 hours, 3 to 4 hours with a grader is $150 an hour. My road rates are a little off, plus an employee, so say $200 an hour. So $800 a week. We're out there most weeks. So 8 times, say, 50. We're up to, is that 40,000? So say 100 a year? Is my math?
Yeah,
You look
you're
80
close.
times, am I missing a zero?
8 times 52. Well, and we don't go out there as often in the wintertime either.
No, it's less frequent in the winter, so we could say,
Okay, you're about $1,000 a trip out there. right? Take the
Yeah.
grader out, fuel, time,
Yeah.
$1,000.
$1,000 a day.
It gives us an idea. Thank you, Riley. I'm not trying to put you guys on the spot, but I'd rather it err on the high side and have a working number in my head, so I appreciate it. Thank you. Further comments from me on these two. 112th for me makes more sense to do anything with than 64th because we've got residential and residential commercial along that stretch that people use on a continuous basis. One of the concerns about doing some improvement work there is the traffic that we're allowing on that road. Now, I know we've got some businesses on that corridor that have equipment. To what extent we might be able to weight restrict limits on there, I'm not sure how many businesses that are further to the south in the industrial area are using that access road. But definitely, I think for me, something to consider on what we're allowing on that road while it's in the current state that it's in. I think even if we restructure it somewhat and oil it, if we're going to allow really heavy traffic onto that road, we're going to continually have the same problem. I have trouble supporting building it to a significant standard because of the development process that's ongoing there right now, and we're not sure what we're going to end up with in terms of what comes out of this ASP. So the throwing good money after bad, Chris, I like that comment. So I for me personally, I don't have. I guess I'm in the middle. I'm not on the cheapest. I'm not on the cheapest solution, and I'm not on the most expensive solution. Somewhere in between, but then with the consideration of what we're allowing for traffic on that road to try and give it some longevity before we have a more fulsome plan for the future. And as far as 64th goes, I think everybody knows where I stand on this one. I would just barricade it at both ends and just not maintain it. It's a convenience road. To me, it's a convenience road. I've driven it. And I don't remember the last time I drove it because I'd rather drive on pavement than gravel. But yeah, to me, it's and then there's future development that's happening there at some point. Who knows whether that's 5 years, 10 years, 50 years down the road. But we all know about the Spitzy Crossing development that's in play there. So that one is a push to the side for me, and 1/12 is the focus. So that's where I sit. Thank you.
Councillor Barton.
Thank you, Mayor. It's interesting hearing all the comments here. It's kind of allowed me to process and kind of bounce around some different ideas. So I guess the first question I have, and I guess is more directed towards Chris, out of those 3 projects that are on page 12, which is 112th, 12th Ave, and 64th, those 3 projects, do we have the ability to do all 3?
Of the 3 road projects?
Yeah.
I think it depends on what other projects, engineering-wise, that you include within that scope. So if there's a stormwater project, pardon me?
Dollar-wise, like, I know there's a potentially, we can only take on 1 project.
Yeah.
I guess the reason why is, is if we were able to take on all 3 of those, I'd rather put more effort into 2 of them instead of 3, right? In my opinion, anyways. 112th, I agree with Michael. Some of the comments that Brenda has said is that maybe that's an option that we look at because we kind of know what we're going to be looking for that in terms of development on each side. We just work on it on that basis. I'm really interested too, though, on 12th Avenue paving because I don't know that we should keep pushing it off. There's other things that are going on 12th Avenue that go beyond the RCMP station further to the west that we need to start looking at and addressing. 64th for me is, I think it's a no-go. I don't know if we do a barricade or not, but I'm kind of halfway in between using it or barricading it. Because I think the one piece too that we've talked about earlier, and it's not really to do with the construction of it, there's safety issues on the on the north end of that road that we talked about, people that are turning off of, is that 543? That highway, 543? Turning off 543, so I think the more work we do and we pave it, it's just gonna cause more people to go down that road and bigger safety issue, in my opinion anyways, on the north end. So, just food for thought.
Councillor Kinghorn?
Thanks, Mayor Snodgrass. So this discussion has brought up a number of more questions than answers, really. So when we talk about 112th and 64th, we really don't know what the numbers are for traffic. Who's using the roads? How many cars are going up and down the roads? What's actually going on? When I look at 112th, incoming heavy traffic, I presume, is using the slip ramp to come into the industrial area as opposed to using the 112th. So is the traffic going out of town using that or coming in? Is it residential? What is it that's actually using the 112th? To me, that's a big question. Same with 64th. I get it. I've driven that road a number of times. In fact, I got to fly over it the other day. But again, what kind of traffic volumes are going through there and who's using it? When I look at the 12th, we keep talking RCMP to the overpass. How much of that is actually going to be covered by Volker-Steven? How far in does their, I don't know if ownership is the right word, but they do have responsibility for a portion of 12th. How far in is it? I don't know. I haven't seen it. And is that taken into consideration when you're looking at these numbers for 12th?
Yeah, Volker-Steven has no ownership. They just have a maintenance contract with us to maintain it, so snow plow it, line paint it, from that perspective. So that's what they do for us. They own where Alberta Transportation owns, is where the edge of the overpass is. And you can see likely the line, when you drive that, there's a difference in asphalt condition. That is probably the edge of the Alberta Transportation's extent, and where the town's extends to.
And have we taken that into consideration when we talked about this
That would be from
number?
The edge of that.
The edge of theirs. And they would, because part of it is theirs, and I've driven it, and I know theirs is pretty rough shape as well. So this would be a joint project. I think if you're going to do it, you got to do the overpass as well as 12th all the way in. And I'd like to see us collaborate a little bit with them guys and see how their feeling is on it and getting that road up to snuff, because it is taking some heavy truck traffic.
And potentially too, at the end of the day, we've scoped that project from the edge of the overpass where our ownership is for the RCMP. We could have all other scopes that reduce this extent. When you take a look at that road, some of the worst sections are from the intersection at No Frills by the vet clinic, through the intersection past McDonald's, to about the RCMP. Some of that is some of the worst, especially the eastbound lanes are some of our worst.
And there's been lots of discussion about that particular intersection because we've got, what do they call it, a pork chop is what they refers to it, that kind of concrete out in the middle, so it makes it difficult for truck traffic turning out to turn, I guess it would be eastbound on that. So to me, it's a little bit bigger project than simply paving. It's a little bit bigger project, but for the other two would it be possible for us to get some real numbers on what the traffic flows are like on 112th and on 64th and more, so we can get numbers of how many vehicles, but is it truck traffic? Is it car traffic? Which direction are they going? Is that possible to do without a huge contingency, Riley?
We could do it. We don't currently have that. So we would have counts, but it wouldn't be classification. So we would have to go redo that.
Can we do that before we make a decision on spending, what are we talking, a couple $1 million here?
We can certainly get traffic counts for 112th. I'm hearing 64th we want traffic counts on 64th as well?
I would like to see it. I don't know. I can't speak for all of council, but I get complaints about that road all the time and how dusty it is and blah, blah, blah. Without having any numbers, I can't say whether or not I'd want to spend any money on it or not. And the last question is offsite levies with respect to 112th. Is that road work can we charge offsite levies and attribute it to that road work? Because I know we're going to be putting some offsite levies in there. Would it include part of that road, or is that sort of off the table?
I don't know if it's in there currently or not. It should, a portion of it should be eligible, but we may have to update the bylaw first.
Okay.
And that's part of the ASP process too, is to build that functioning servicing so that we can update the offsite levy bylaw, that development pays for development, and making sure that we cover those costs. But certainly the traffic counts, we can facilitate that quite quickly, actually.
Just to clarify on the levies, generally it would be any oversizing that would be eligible, like the base cost we might still be on the hook for, unless it's already in there.
Well, presumably if they develop into industrial sort of,
then they would need
put out there, if they're going to put a bunch of truck traffic going up and down that road, it's going to have to be a little different standard than if it's just cars.
Correct, and that increase in standard would be eligible.
We can even get counts by the counters.
Careful on that one. Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Mayor Snodgrass. Can we get some clarification on the STIP grant? How many times can be applied for? What's the percentage that might be covered?
You're going to test my memory a bit. Yep. So STIP grants come in once a year, and you can apply for one project a year, and it has to be a regionally significant transportation corridor or a local bridge from that to meet their criteria. The last STIP grant that we received was for the airport and some improvements to the airport, and that was, if my recollection was correct, was a 65% grant funding from Strategic Transportation Initiatives Program. So they do adjust that. Your maximum is probably around 60 to 65% from the STIP grant that you can receive some funding for it.
Thank you. And considering that too, I agree with maybe not applying for it for a gravel road, which definitely I think that road needs to be looked at, again, with the ASP in place or until it's in place. Really understanding what that road looks like. I am sort of going in the middle of the ground there where it's usable, user-friendly, but a bit more cost-effective. 12th Avenue is definitely a road that is used, I'm going to say, by everybody in our town and people coming in and out. So that's a very important road. And maintaining it on a regular basis makes more sense to me than all of a sudden having a big cost to do, say, the whole thing or a large portion of it, when we already know that this portion of the road is definitely deteriorating. And if we could apply for partial funding from this grant, to me, that one makes the most sense in going forward with that. 64th, as much as I love it, and I do not want to barricade it, I would love to get some counts on it because there are a lot of people, I mean, I see it every day, how many people drive that road. I agree it has some issues, but it would not be on my list for this year at all. Thank you.
Okay. Who's in favor of doing traffic counts on both 112th and 64th? Okay, so we'll get traffic counts on 112th and 64th. We're not going to do the in and out today because there's a lot to absorb and there's a lot of projects, so we'll do that at the next meeting. We can zip through that after everybody's had time to go through that. How fast can you find out about STIP grants on things like 12th Avenue or anything?
We can get clarity from the ministry within the week.
Okay.
Applications are due by November 30th. So anything that we want to apply for STIP, we need to apply by November 30th. Typically, announcements aren't until the spring, so that's a little bit of a crunch. But they do give you some additional time that will go over a calendar year if you have to carry it over.
Okay. Is there anything else on this list that council wants to discuss? Of course, this isn't the last day to discuss these at all. We've got a minimum of 2 more meetings that they can be discussed at, more if required. I have one presentation to make that I need about 20 minutes, half an hour in this meeting that I want to get a proposal put in front of council today. But if there's anything else, we got a few more minutes. We're in here till noon, so is there anything else you want to talk about now that we kind of have a little bit of direction on those roads that are discussion every year? Anything? Okay. David, do you have anything else for this before I?
Just a reminder on next steps, future meetings. We're back here next week, November 12th. We look for approval of the final budget and so on and so forth. That concludes our comments. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, David. Well, while Councillor Kinghorn is in the washroom, Marcel, I can get hooked up over there and.
Mayor Snodgrass,
Yep.
does my little seat light up there when I push ready to speak?
There you are now. Yep. Sorry. Go ahead.
Is it okay if I throw some things out? Thanks. While we're waiting for Councillor Kinghorn, these are just little things I had notes. Accessibility for the culture center. Chris, you mentioned it's not necessarily up to code. Either it is code or it isn't code, I think, but was there some concerns from people trying to access it that it's not working properly? And
Yeah, it's too steep, so for some individuals with walkers, especially with oxygen, struggle to get up to the top because of the steepness. The new coach is supposed to, it's a grandfathered. I use the word grandfathered accessibility ramp. You're allowed to use it until you decide to change it. So we've been using it. So a couple things. One, with the new code, it cannot go directly out into a streetscape. It has to have a break at the bottom or a landing that allows a safe slow down spot, I suppose, so that from that perspective. Plus, it has to be 2% or less in grade to comply with accessibility standards. So while it's functional, there are some individuals that do struggle with it. And so, anything we can do to improve accessibility, I think, is a good thing. As we all seem to age, we need to find different ways and different strategies. So we've been looking at a lift system as well as a new ramp concept. The lift is half the price of a new ramp, but it's the durability of the ramp in an exterior application that we're uncertain about.
it just leads to another question, because there's some interior work that was listed too as well at the Culture Center, and I'm just starting to think, perhaps is that facility not being used for the right purpose? We've spent money there since my time on council. We spent money there before on renovations and whatnot. We have the Charles Clark Medical Facility now, and there is space in there. And sometimes, I'm just looking at other options. Again, it's the spend on the money in a situation that, are we going to end up with a product that is long-term and viable, or are we going to spend money and change it again now to change it again in 5 or 10 years. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I just think that it at least that came up in my mind when I was looking at this was, okay, we're going back to the culture center and we're doing more things to try and make it fit for a purpose. Is that the right building for the purposes that we're seeing short-term, long-term? That was all. It's not to kill the projects, it's just to bring the conversation forward.
No, I think it's good conversation. I think they're very happy where they are. I think it suits the purposes that they wanted to see happen there. The divider wall, it was something that we always knew that we had a sound problem from the day one in that facility, and we wanted to take a couple of years to understand exactly what the use would be and what the sound attenuation that was integrated into the renovations, if it would work or not. There's a desire for a little bit more privacy for conversations, and I think the divider wall is a good spin. There is a pseudo divider wall, but it's one of those, I'd almost say like a paper accordion wall that folds out, and this would be a glass divider wall that would be more soundproof and break up the sound. The accessibility standards, even if it remained as a public facility at some point in time, we'd have to upgrade that ramp to something or enhance the accessibility. I think it's a fantastic building, and I think it's got some functionality for the current use, and they certainly like having their independence being separated from other entities.
We're good? Oh, there you are, Kelly. Yep, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So just further to Councillor Nychuk, I believe we spent a fair bit of money on privacy pods for that space. So is the use of them not meeting, like, I'm at a loss to understand why we need additional when those other pods were fairly pricey, if I recall.
The pods are used intensively and used for meetings, used for our counseling services. It's when clients come into back-to-back desks, because they'll have multiple clients in at the same time, that it gets hard to hear what individuals are saying.
I see.
So that's what the intent would be.
Okay, thank you.
Now we're good? We're good? Thanks, David. Thanks, Michelle.
Are we done?
Yeah.
Councillor Kinghorn, just to confirm, I just checked, and an urban standard is in the offsite levy bylaw for 112. So we are collecting money to convert it to an urban standard.
Okay, so
that's
urban
not really-
standard is more vehicles, it doesn't account for truck traffic, that sort of thing?
So urban standard would be like with curbs, the sewer, the water, everything like that. So remedial work or interim measures wouldn't be covered, but when we decide to pull the trigger, to Chris's point on the ASP and do that, that is already allowed for by the offsite levies.
Thank you.
Use this one now. Okay. I am going to propose for council an alternative way to fund the pool expansion. Obviously through the public comments and what's going on with that, and looking at the comments that I've seen on my own Facebook page with the couple of posts that I've put on there, and previous feedback and everything, that the borrowing is contentious, of course. The alternative is that we do have reserve accounts available and reserve monies available that we have acquired over the last 11 years. Now, this isn't the first time this has been discussed, because it's been brought up in conversations in the past about using reserve accounts, the issue being that we are quite protective. I don't want this sitting here. Let's do this. Quite protective of the reserve accounts that we've built up over the last 11 years, because when the first council I was involved in realized immediately that the town of High River had $0 in reserves. And things like wastewater and those utilities, all those monies were going into general operating and financing different general operating procedures. So anyways, there's a couple of things that I got feedback on that were very clear. Number one, the public does not like the idea of a 30-year borrow, and I get it. That's long. And the only reason why we went and considered a 30-year borrow was to keep the yearly impact to taxpayers as low as we possibly could. So that was the first one. The second one is that the interest rate that you pay when borrowing money from the provincial government, estimated approximately 5.62% there a few weeks ago, whatever it's going to be when Bank of Canada reduces rate, and with Danielle Smith's announcement that they're going back to the 2021 rates. That won't happen until January. Regardless, you're paying interest one way or another, and the feedback was they didn't like that, and I get it. Paying interest, nobody likes to do it. So we were being very protective with our reserve funds, knowing full well that we do have and always have infrastructure projects in the future that require money. I am okay now with proposing that we borrow money from our reserves with a payback plan, because those reserves are not just a cash grab bank account. Those reserve funds need to exist. They need to be continually funded. And if we borrow from them for projects like this or anything else in the future, that there has to be a payback plan in the future as to how you get it. So here's what I'm proposing. With the pool financing, and these are numbers that are that we've been using. So the internal financing total would be the $13.6 million that was the previous borrow ask. That could be funded, and I'll go through this a number of different ways, but through a local improvement tax. So the $147 came from what that 30-year borrow looked like, and I'm just using the $147 just for that. This would be applied to the 6,310 properties equally, so each property would pay $147 per year, and that would generate $927,000 a year that we could put towards this payback to our reserves. We also have the tax stabilization reserve available to us. So the tax stabilization reserve was a gift from the province, and the savings that we accrued through the COVID times with reduced staff, etc. So currently that tax stabilization reserve is sitting at $3.989 million. That one's negotiable for council. So the 147 is negotiable, and how much you use out of that tax stabilization reserve. It's it's tax stabilization. So whether you use all of it here or whether you use some of it in the future, I don't think it really matters. It's going to be used for what it's intended to do. So to me, it makes no difference if we use it all on this project. It reduces the amount of monies directly from the taxpayer. So how this would work is that in 2025, you've gone from 13.6, you're now down to 8.7 million owing. In 2026, the local improvement tax is applied at the 927, but you also have the Highway 543 debenture and the CP Lands debenture. Both of those would be paid off at the end of 2025. So in 2026, you have those monies available. You could add to your total payment 268 plus the other 197 from the CP Lands. So now you're putting 1.4 towards that budget, or towards the repayment of the 13.6. As we continue to go down, we have those for the next 1-2 years. In 2029, you also have where the field house is paid off. That's a $611,000 payment per year that could be applied to this debt. So now you've got a total payment of $2 million, and which brings you to a fully paid off facility in 6 years. So 6 years is on 6 years is assuming you're using $147 per year local improvement tax, and you're also using the full amount of the tax stabilization reserve. You could chop your local improvement tax in half, so now you're going to $75 per year per property in High River. Brings you down to $473,000, which equates to a payback time period of 8 years, which is still damn good. You could also go to a local improvement tax of $0, using the full amount of the tax stabilization reserve. You have a fully paid off facility in 12 years. So, no decision needed today. I did vet this through David and Chris just before this meeting to get their thoughts on it. It's all doable, and achieves a number of the issues that we heard from the public, being the amortization. It takes it from a 30-year borrow to 5, 7, or 11 years, or 6, 8, or 12 that need to be changed. The interest rate, we would not be charging ourselves any interest, so it takes it from a 5.62% interest rate to a 0% interest rate. The local improvement tax would be a council decision as to how that goes, and the tax stabilization fund usage. Moving into the future, how we're looking at this as to how it affects things in the future. So once the pool is paid off, whatever that local improvement tax is, that amount immediately comes off of people's tax bills. The Highway 543 debenture would come off of the tax bills, and the CP Lands debenture would come off of the tax bills. The Fieldhouse borrow of $611, my thought is that amount remains, but it is put into a reserve account for future recreation. Recreation is not cheap. It's required. You have to provide it in your community, and I think it's healthy that we have reserves for a number of other infrastructure pieces, and I think it's healthy that we do that for the same thing. At the end of all this, our debt load, we wouldn't have any debt with the provincial government. That would all be done. So any future major infrastructure projects that we might have being a wastewater, water treatment facility or wastewater upgrades that they keep talking about, but, we have an enormous amount of borrowing capacity of over $40 million. So this would still result in reserves being funded, I think at a minimum, David said today 2.7, I think it's around 3.2 that reserves would continue to be funded while we go through this as well. So that's what I wanted to put in front of council today. There's no decision going to be made today on this. I just wanted to show you that there is a way that achieves all of the feedback that we've been getting from the public on the nervousness of borrowing on a 30-year borrow. I get it, but we have to be very, very careful because it's taken 11 years to get us into a healthy position with our reserves. That we got to make sure we're not just using that and bleeding that as cash. That's just go blow it someday. That's not responsible. So. That's what I'll put in front of you today. We can discuss it in the future. Thank you.
Can you share that deck with us, Mr. Mayor? Thank you.
Okay, it's 11:30. Any other questions for the budget discussions? See none, hear none. Meeting adjourned 11:28.